My name is Phil Wexler, and I run Words Out Loud, which is a reading series alternating between featured readers and open mic. It's the first Friday of the month at 7:30 Eastern Time. It's a hybrid series, such as we're doing right now, which means we have it in person here, which is the Friends of the Library of Montgomery County bookstore. So we have a nice audience in front of us, and that's the in-person live segment. And the remote is on Zoom. That's where those of you that are tuning in via Zoom are seeing us. This is a special installment. All right, it is not first Friday of the month as you've guessed. It's Sunday at 3 here in the bookstore, and for all of you in the audience. And I essentially am going to relinquish my usual role of whatever you want to call it, host or introducer, and turn this special program over to Karen Alanier, and I'm going to introduce her, and she'll tell you all about it. Karen Lalonde Alanier is the author of 8 poetry collections. Her latest is How We All Hold On from Broadstone Books 2021. She's editor or co-editor of 3 anthologies, the latest being From the Belly, Poets Respond to Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons, which is the focus of this program this afternoon. Gertrude Stein invents a jump early on. Her jazz opera with composer Bill Banfield premiered June 2005 in New York by Encompass New Opera Theater. And she's currently working with Janet Peachy on What Price Paradise, a jazz opera that features the love story of Jane and Paul Bowles. So thanks for organizing all this, Karen, and it's all yours.
I want to welcome everybody, and I want to thank Phil Wexler and Lance, who is here in the bookstore, for setting up and hosting this special event. And to be part of this very special Words Out Loud program. Okay, so From the Belly, Poets Respond to Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons is a 3-book project based on the 3 sections of Tender Buttons, which is a long poem. So the 3 sections are objects, food, and rooms. And this book, which everybody can see here in the room, and this is the book. This is the book, has a artwork by Grace Cavallari. And let's see, where are we? Okay, anyway, my initial study of Tender Buttons happened inside a massive open online course that came to be nicknamed ModPo. ModPo, officially known as the course Modern and Contemporary American Poetry, was developed at the University of Pennsylvania by Professor Al Filreis. ModPo has been running online every fall since 2012, and it has an international fan following. And there are some people in the room who are part of that program, have been part of that program, as well as people who are part of this anthology. There are many ways to respond to Stein's text. It could be through use of Stein's personal life. It could be through techniques that she uses herself. It could be imitation of Stein's style, like repetition, language play that includes puns, near rhymes, visual proximities that surprise the reader and perhaps cause the tongue to slip. It could be by playing games and naming contradictions like Stein did in some of her texts. One of the goals of this volume is to have fun. The book, done in a large format with lots of white space, invites the reader to write response poems. So you too could be in this book. You just need a copy. Today's reading will showcase 4 Tender Buttons poems and responses from these readers, including me. I will read Stein's tender button poem for each responding poet, which will help you distinguish Stein's text from the responding poet's text. I've asked each reader to start with a soundbite of his bio and a signature poem or one that is a particular favorite from their own work. That way you'll learn something more about the poet responding to Gertrude Stein's work. To conclude the individual readings, I have also asked the poets to say something about their process and writing and how they wrote this particular response poem. So here goes. I am Karen Lalonde Alanier, the first poet published by the Word Works in 1975. And in 2023, I'm the editor of From the Belly, Poets Respond to Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons. My signature poem is Leo on Seesaw, which was part of my opera that aired in New York in 2005. And here's how I read it, different from the opera, obviously. Leo on Seesaw for the pleasure of Gertrude Stein. Little Buddha, kleine Bruder, tiny brother, bitty bother, sitting boldly in the butter, in the batter, shaking philosophic digits in the kitchen, for the Küchen has been eaten by the kitten, wearing mittens in the winter, hiding splinters in his fingers, finding spiders in the cracks of the plaster. So we laugh 20 ha 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 in metered breathing, something close to the day he was born. Recently, I was asked to translate one of my poems into French for Grace Cavaleri's Voice as Bridge annual program. So I translated Leo on Seesaw because Gertrude Stein lived most of her life in France, and I think this might help persuade you how important the subject of Gertrude Stein is to me. So here goes with Leo on Seesaw in French. Léo sur la balançoire pour le plaisir de Gertrude Stein. Petite Bouddha, enfant Bouddha, kleiner Bruder, toute grande blague, peu de peine, assis chauve, dans le beurre, dans la pâte, secouant ses pouces philosophiques dans la cuisine parce que le Kuchen a été mangé par le chaton, portant des gants en printemps, cachant des écharpes dans ses doigts, trouvant des frêlons dans les fissures du plâtre. Alors, nous avons ri. 21, ha ha, ha ha, quelque chose de proche de la journée, il est né. Okay, so I have written many Tender Buttons response poems, and the one that I picked out for today responds to Gertrude Stein's A Method of Cloak. And this is from her Tender Buttons. A single climb to a line, a straight exchange to a cane, a desperate adventure, and courage, and a clock, and all this which is a system, which has the feeling, which has the resignation and success, all makes an attractive black silver. Here is my response. Taken for a ride. Cluck, cloak, clock, clang, bang, rang. Two bell brains chucking corsets, removing pantaloons, petticoats, high button boots. Only time, ticking time in the saddle could buck her off. Was she fly? Was she prig? Cluck, cloak, clock, clang, bang, rang. Now, regarding my process, I see signs a method of cloak as part of the courtship story of Gertrude wooing Alice. In biographical texts, I read that Gertrude Stein and Alice went on a hike up in the Tuscan Hills because Gertrude wanted to propose something to her. And it was a very, very hot day in Florence. And so things got chucked as they went. So Gertrude felt she was running out of time and needed to settle down so she could concentrate on her literary goals. It was also an under wraps or secret meeting because same-sex marriages were forbidden. Alice was said to have heard a bell ring after this encounter with Gertrude. Our next reader is Hal Greenwald.
I'm Hal Greenwald. I'm a professor of computer science at George Mason University and a poetry enthusiast. I was inspired by Al Filreis and the ModPo group. And here's my poem. It's entitled On Listening to Chopin's E Minor Prelude. Revisiting these lonely notes, evening hibiscus gently brews, chromatic descent hauntingly floats ivory, tenderly milking the muse. Majorca's monastery must surely weep strains forlorn embossed. Your cadence beckons me to sleep, assuaging tears from loved ones lost.
Hal responded to a red hat, and here is a red hat, Gertrude Stein's work. A dark gray, a very dark gray, a quite dark gray is monstrously ordinary. It is so monstrous because there is no red in it. If red is everything, it is not necessary. Is that not an argument for any use of it? And even so, is there any place that is better? Is there any place that has so much stretched out?
And my response, a red hat. There we lay, stretched out, beneath red cumulus, surrendering to the Leviathan, cloaked in gray shroud, yet filled with light. As far as the process, like many, I find Gertrude Stein very challenging. And the technique that I use to respond was allowing myself to free associate and to say what comes to mind. And there's a balance that goes with that. There's when you do that, you're opening yourself up, and there's a sense of vulnerability, but that's also what makes it, gives it an edgy quality and can make it a very beautiful experience. And next we have Margie Ross.
Greetings. I'm Margie Ross, a former paralegal and electronic legal research pioneer who was really always interested in poetry. Of course, life intervened. Until following retirement, I joined the online ModPo class and a weekly poetry discussion group in Washington, D.C. The poem I have chosen to share today was published in the New Verse News. Last bus. I catch the last bus out of downtown DC on April 4th, 1968. Fires loom and looters have a field day at DJ Kaufman's across Pennsylvania Avenue from the DOJ, where I monitor urban riots. For the Attorney General, now it's me in the midst of the melee, headed toward Georgetown, hoping to get home. 50 plus years, history repeats. It's one step forward, 5 back. Police still kill with impunity. Cities burn, no end to toxic words from a reality TV host. Good trouble trashed as anarchy. When reading Ta-Nehisi Coates years ago, I protested. Exaggeration, no more. Between the world and me, that last bus is leaving. I responded to a handkerchief, and Karen will tell you about that.
A handkerchief, a winning of all the blessings, a sample, not a sample, because there is no worry.
Handkerchief, kerchief, bandana, hanky, handmade heirloom lace, initialed, embroidered, adorned, sunshield, bandage or COVID cover, cloth safeguard for Itzhak's Stradivarius, something for absorption in times of heat, sorrow, or disease, flag of surrender or truce, intimate object, disguised token of tenderness, Desdemona's first gift from Othello, flirty coded message, depending on color and location, furtive hanky-panky. So here I am with mounds of outmoded folded fabric I simply cannot relinquish. Gertrude, my Gertrude, grandmother of my heart. About my process, upon hearing or being assigned to Stein's poem, my mind immediately went to my grandmother's large box of fabric, doilies, and lace, which resides in my attic. Okay. Like Cubist art, I looked at all sides and facets of handkerchiefs, viewing them from multiple aspects. And of course, I could not help but associate my grandmother's name, Gertrude, with Gertrude Stein, allowing me finally my own poetic voice breaking through in the poem's last two stanzas. Please welcome Barbara Goldberg, our next and final poet responding to Tender Buttons.
So my name is Barbara Goldberg, and I have 8 or so books of poetry, and the latest one being new and selected, Breaking an Entry. And I'm also a translator and an editor. I edit the WordWorks International series. So that's been a great joy. And the poem I want to read, I chose this because if I didn't know better, I would have thought Gertie had written it herself. So it's called Ballad of the Id. I am your rose hips and bunting and bootleg, and I am your black bangs, those devil spikes, and I am your spine when you lie down in tickle grass, the zipper, the cock, all glistening and white, and I am the stars that roll in their sockets, that blink on the night. I could be Gibraltar or jukebox or drumstick. Without me, you're puny and pallid and prudish, and with you are banquet, a wishbone with tassels. That time in the bistro, I bit your sister and squealed on the porter. And who pulled you out of the muck of intention? Who sang hosannas for spunk and risk? Who shorted the sheets? Who stole your tom-tom? Just ask and I'll tell you. I did. I did.
So Barbara responded to a shawl, and a shawl is a hat and a hurt and a red balloon and an undercoat and a sizer of talk. A shawl is a wedding, a piece of wax, a little build. A shawl. Pick a ticket, pick it in strange steps with hollows. There is hollow belt. A belt is a shawl, a plate that has a little bobble, all of them any so, Please, around it is ticket. It was a mistake to state that a laugh and a lip and a laid climb and a depot and a cultivator and a little choosing is a point of it.
When Karen first came to me with this cockamamie project, I thought, I don't know anything about Gertrude Stein and the way that I didn't understand a word she said when she was writing. And I thought, well, then what I'll do is I don't understand a word. And that's how I approached it in terms of process. And Hal said something about free association. That's exactly the way I worked, as you could hear from the Super Ego Serenade. I'll tell you a surprise about that. It ends with just ask and I'll tell you, I did. It. Isn't that clever? But anyway, so I got this shawl business and I saw that she rhymes. She uses rhyme a lot. So I decided, well, I'll do that. I can do that. And so it starts off, and there's a lot of wordplay in this. And if you don't see it in front of you, you won't see the spelling. For instance, the first line is a call is not a shawl, and that's C-A-U-L. A call is not a shawl, not the be nor the end all. A shrug for the shoulder when fall turns horizontal. Soft to touch if born from silky underbellies of fleece sheep shed before summer. So fine it pulls through a finger ring. So fine, fit for a bride or traveler or king. Everything is reversible, two-faced, such as faith. Which comes first, talit or cashmere? A sky blue tail points to perfection, not perfection, but display on the counter of piety. An industry can start up with less. And as for process, I don't know. I did a lot of research, which is interesting. I mean, I looked up shawl to see what kind of fabrics it could be made up. And I was very happy to find goat, because then I could, research what part of the goat was used in terms of making a, cashmere or a shawl. So I guess in the end, I had fun with it and I decided to play, and I'm glad you're all here and willing to play too. Thank you.
Okay, stay there. I'd like to see if there are any questions for Barbara while she's standing here, because it's, a little awkward. So let's do that. And if you're in the audience on Zoom, you can put it in the chat and we can pick it up from there.
Well, I just do want to say one thing. What I liked about this presentation today is that, as I say, we have civilians partaking. That means not professional poets and well, you know what I mean, professional. I mean, we just love you because we go through life thinking no one reads us. So it's lovely. And that you even took a try at this is just really gratifying. I'm sure for Karen more.
Yeah. I just want to say that the project will continue on in this manner, sort of, because each of these sections of Tender Buttons are different one from the other. And so the second section, which is now completely formed, and I'm working on the introduction, will be not quite the same way, because I found that in the object section, Gertrude Stein was very objective. She was very scientific and things were singular. But in the food section, which is the middle section of the book, she was full of feelings and emotion. And it was, the double, her love for Alice was more clear. So, you have the story going threading through all of the individual parts of Tender Buttons, but it's coded because it has to be coded, because it wasn't a relationship that was allowed the light of day. Even in Paris, where people were a little more out there, Stein was not that type of person. She lived a very private life, and she liked writing her English in a country that didn't speak English. She liked, writing for herself and strangers, she said. So, but, that's how this worked. And I really appreciate Phil and his generosity because this is a program that is outside his usual process of programs, because usually he has his programs on Friday nights. So for those of you who are in the audience and want to support him, just tune in to his schedule for Friday nights. I see a question here in the house. Debbie.
The dynamic of the project is one person produces a work of art and other people think about it and respond to it. And I think one way to think about Gertrude Stein, is very hard for me to warm up to Gertrude Stein, but one way to think about it is that I think that maybe she was responding to the environment around her, and the painters, the other artists were painters who were sort of fracturing reality and fracturing the two-dimensional frame. And what do you think about that? That Gertrude Stein as doing her poems as a response to these other artists?
Okay, so Debbie's question has to do with Gertrude Stein and the painters who were around her during the time that she was writing this and living in France. And of course, she was influenced by Picasso, who was in his Cubist period. And the Cubism really made her brother Leo angry because he didn't like it. But yes, you can see the Cubism, like she goes at these various objects in different ways. So you have, she'll come at it one way and then she'll come at it another way. So you get the all dimensions at the same time. So yes, she was very much, tuned into the artistic zeitgeist, that she was very much interested in what art was. And she also was interested in the interplay between her audience and herself. She wanted and encouraged people to react to her. I mean, she didn't want people to throw tomatoes, but she wanted, to have a conversation. And she had this technique that she called listening and talking and listening. So in other words, this had to happen at the same time in order to create a work. So I always say that you shouldn't go into the Steinian woods alone. You should go with your friends and family because you will have a better time and you will learn more things that way. So, and that also is in keeping with this cubism, that you come at it from various angles.
Yeah, Cubism in the language.
Yes. Yes. And when she came to the United States to do her lecture tour in 34 and 35, she saw what Cubism looked like from the air because she was an early flyer. She had to fly to Chicago when she got here because her opera, Four Saints and Three Acts, had moved to Chicago. It had 60 performances on the New York stage, which was phenomenal, but she missed it. And in order to see it, she had to go to Chicago. And in order to get there in time, she had to fly. And so they convinced her to do it. She did it. And then when she looked out the window, she saw the landscape and it looked very much like Picasso's work. She was flying over the farmlands and the different crops all looked, like a canvas of painting. So anyway, are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question too back here. So how did people in the group get their topic? Did they pick their poem that they were going to respond to with their own poem, or were they assigned?
They were assigned, and I did it by lottery. What I did was I took everybody's name and I cut up the names and I put it in one hat, and then I took the poems and I cut them up and I put them in the other hat and I matched them up. So it was done by lottery, so to speak. So that's how it came about, because I felt that there was no fair way to do this, because if people started requesting things and then when there would be fights, that would be ridiculous. And nobody complained anyway about my assignments. But there were some people who dropped out. So there was that. But that didn't matter. Said thanked them, and I got another person who was interested in trying their hand at this. Sort of like throwing, what do you call it? The Yi Jing, So that's how I was doing it. So somebody asked me to talk about how this project came about. Well, I had been working with ModPo international students online, doing explication de texte. We were looking at each text of Tender Buttons objects and trying to get them understood for everybody, for as much as that was possible. And so it came to the way that I understand things is by writing poetry. So whenever I have a mystery that I don't understand, I usually write a poem about it. So I started writing all these poems. And then it occurred to me that, hey, I'm not taking my own advice. I need to bring everybody else into the Steinian woods, and we all need to do this together. And so that's more or less how this came about. So
how many years have you been doing this?
Well, I started in earnest on this particular subject matter, Tender Buttons, in 2012 when ModPo started. And then the next year, I organized in the discussion forums in ModPo, all these international students, and we talked about each little segment, each word. We would go word by word by word, so it was a long process. And I was blogging about all these things, and my blog posts are still out there. You can still read what the group had to say about individual bits of it. Margie.
Do you anticipate that these volumes might help people introduce Gertrude Stein to novices or students in general?
I do. I think it's a great way to introduce Stein to students who want to explore what Stein is like. And also it's good for creative writing classes. So there's, it's done in a workbook format, it's big, so it's not your usual size. I mean, Barbara's book, Breaking and Enter, is this size, and hers is big because she's, got many years of books on it. But this one is wide and it has white space in it.
Sharon, what tragedy to Gertrude Stein in the first place?
Okay, so in 1978, I started reading the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, and I thought, this is fun, and everybody needs an Alice in their life because life was tough back then. And, I was trying to work and raise a son and, do all the things that one does to, for a career. I was working for the government. So that's where it started. It started with the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, and I started writing poems, and Leo and Seesaw came about in that period of time. I also might say about Leo and Seesaw that I got help from Paul Bowles, who was a poet, composer, and a novelist. His novel, The Sheltering Sky, was put in film by Bertolucci, the Italian filmmaker. And I spent 3 weeks in Tangier with him in 1982. So, and he helped me with that poem. He gave it a little bit more. He said I should have a little bit more rhythm in it. So I did. And that's one of the poems that, was a testimony to my dedication to Gertrude.
Karen, I wanted to ask, I know very little about Gertrude Stein. I've read hardly anything, and I consider what I've seen and heard, she's a very singular writer. Are there, that you're aware of, other well-known poets prior, subsequent to her, who have written stylistically like that and not simply as reaction or inspired by?
Oh, yeah, there are many people who are in what is called the language school of poetry. You know, that there are all these experimentalists, and that's what ModPo gives you. So at the week 4, you get Gertrude Stein, and then after that, you get all of these experimental people. You know, people like Joan Ritalik, who used to live actually in our area. She's part of, I think, Bard College now, but you know, there are lots of different people who do this kind of language play. Yeah, so what's interesting about Stein is that she was considered both a modernist and a postmodernist, because they never really completely got her as a modernist. But she was a very early modernist, before Virginia Woolf and before Pound started. She was, you know, doing her thing.
Were you planning to have a panel discussion too at any point? Or
No, we're not doing a panel today because the challenges of the camera.
Well, I could try if you want to.
No, that's okay. I think this is probably what we have a question. Jessica. Okay, let's see. Actually, Jessica, you know, by bringing up your name, Jessica wrote a book that is the feminist view of Moby Dick. And one of my theories is that Gertrude Stein was influenced royally by Moby Dick, and that the water imagery in Tender Buttons is not usual for you know, usually water represents women and fire represents men, but it doesn't work that way in Tender Buttons. And so I started looking at the text and finding things that looked very much like Moby Dick. So that's an unfinished project that I have, you know, waiting in the background. When I have 2 more lives, I probably will get to that.
That's exciting. I mean, you could say that Melville is an early modernist too. I know people don't think of him that way, but
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jessica. Jessica's published by the WordWorks, by the way, and we published that book. What's the title of the book, Jessica?
it's called Hunt.
Hunt.
2017, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and it was a Washington Prize winner, and that's what we're in right now. It's the Washington Prize judging season. That's what I've been doing this week and last week. So anyway, well, I think
You might want to take note of the one of the comments there by Nathan Jr.
the comments. Read more Gertrude Stein. Yes. Well, actually, if you're going to read Gertrude Stein and you haven't read her before, I do recommend reading the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas first, and also read the portrait of Picasso. That's another thing that's pretty accessible. So, and then, you know, read from the belly, because you'll have fun and you can laugh and you can try your hand at it yourself. So anyway, I do have a few copies for sale if anybody in the house would like one. And Barbara has her book as well. So I really
do a
thank
quick
you.
scan of the audience. If I
Okay.
could try, it'll be shaky, but just so we could, you know, this is not exactly a wonderful camera, but here is our audience, our live audience. I think I've got almost everybody, since this is being recorded, and very grateful to the live audience and the digital audience coming in that's live somewhere else. Did you have any
I'll just-
closing words?
Okay. Well, I'd really like to thank my participants for this program, because I really believe that people should say honestly what their experience is with Gertrude Stein. And I know I can always depend on Barbara Goldberg to completely speak her mind and tell everybody what she's thinking, and it's fun. And, you know, so that represents the spirit of what we're doing here. And I do thank Margie and Hal, because they have come along for the ride. And I think they did a beautiful job. And I really appreciate everybody coming out today, both on Zoom and here in Rockville in this wonderful bookstore. So thank you, Phil.
Okay, thanks to everybody. I'll close it up now. If you do want to check out Words Out Loud, it's almost always announced on Eventbrite, or you could send me an email if you want to be put on the mailing list. It's philipwexler@msn.com. And take care. See you all another time, hopefully.